Natural You listeners. Thank you for joining me on another episode. Today, I have a really interesting guy. His name is Simon Bellingham. He's a wildlife guide and he's worked all over the world and is quite an expert in mammals. So, we're going to benefit from chatting to him and listening to some of his stories. Simon is an old friend of mine, and I'll let him tell the story of his journey to where he got to now. So, first of all, Simon, welcome.
Thanks very much, Tim. Yeah, really, really great to be on your show. Quite a privilege to be on your show, actually. But yeah, it's great to be here. And yeah, it's been a journey. I obviously met you when we were studying chiropractic back in Durban, but I've had quite a journey prior to that. I grew up in Zimbabwe, and as a child, spent my childhood running around the bush, looking mostly at birds. I was an avid birder as a child, but but then eventually I made my way to chiropractic. And the reason why I wanted to be a chiropractor is actually because I had a strong passion for naturopathy. And that was obviously from my childhood influence in nature. And I did my chiropractic degree and loved it and loved practicing, and actually practiced in the UK for a bit. I practiced in Sheffield and Doncaster. Um, but but there was always this thing inside me that really wanted me to get back to nature. And then I actually came back to South Africa to practice in South Africa, and friends that were working for Richard Branson at a very nice property that he has in the Sabi Sand adjacent to the Kruger National Park asked me to come there and work as a chiropractor. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity. I wasn't working in a practice at the time. And I started treating people as kind of a maybe an inappropriate word, because the people that they would get like a very luxurious chiropractic treatment with a massage thrown in after doing a game drive. And it was a good job. I was enjoying it, but I looked at what the guides are doing, and my whole life had been running around in the bush looking at birds and wildlife. And I thought that's something that I really want to give a go. So I changed from being a chiropractor, and I went back to doing different guide training courses and started working as a wildlife guide, not for Richard Branson at that stage. I was working for another company, which back then was called CC Africa. It's now And Beyond. And it was a wild adventure. I started working for almost nothing, living in a little tent as a guide. And on the one hand, financially, it was a major setback. But I had elephants outside my tent. I had buffalo that I had to dodge in the morning to get to work. And it was the beginning of a great adventure. And I always had in the back of my mind that I'd go back to being a chiropractor. But there was one thing that I'll never forget as a chiropractor, is that a lot of patients that I saw would tell me if they could do their life differently, they'd follow their passions. And I was doing it. I was living my passion at the time. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to listen to my patients, and I'm going to carry on doing this for as long as I feel it's appropriate. Well, I'm still guiding wildlife trips today. I set up wildlife trips around the world, and that's where I got to now, Tim.
Wow! It's such a cool story, and the fact that you listened to your heart's passion, and you found your way back into the bush, as it were.
Yeah.
It's lovely to hear. And you mentioned there that you traveled all over the world, and I know you did some work in Brazil. So I'm very curious as to how you ended up in Brazil, and if you can just tell us about some of the projects you ended up setting up there. That'll be very interesting.
Yeah, no, look, I've done lots of. I was guiding in lodges to start off with. Actually, I did full circle. I ended up guiding for And Beyond. I worked for Londolozi, and I came back and I worked for Richard Branson at his property Ulusaba in the Sabi Sand. But my child was conceived, and I had to come out of the bush back to an urban environment, and so I decided what I'd do is I'd set up a travel company that looks for wildlife. Then it was mostly mammal focused. As I said, I've always been a bit of a closet bird. I love looking at the birds. So Now it's just general wildlife. But then it was very mammal focused, but it was looking at wildlife around the world. So I've tracked giant pandas in central China. This is not going to a rehabilitation center or a zoo. This is the real deal, seeing them in the mountains in Fopeng. And and on these journeys, I had one Brazilian friend, still a very good friend today, Mario Haberfeld, that would sometimes join me. And he was racing cars for Formula One at the time. He was actually test driving cars with Jordan, McLaren. His name is Mario Haberfeld. And he wanted to leave racing because he was getting to the end well, to an age where it was no longer appropriate. And he said he wanted to set up a lodge in Africa. And I said to Mario, you know what? Fair enough. It's a beautiful dream, but probably your country being more biodiverse than South Africa needs a good wildlife lodge more. So he invited me out to the Amazon to start off with, and and it was difficult to find it in there, and eventually down to a family friend in the south in the Pantanal to do something there. And there were beautiful birds, they're spectacular birds, but the one thing that there was there that made it very easy for me to get involved is all over the ground there were jaguar tracks, and the owner had only seen 8 jaguar in his life. So I said, well, there's the inn. This ghost in the forest, which is what the jaguars were known as, would be the perfect animal to focus your efforts on, because if you can get this animal out of the forest so that people can see him, that'll be a good draw card. And when they come and they see the jaguar, well, of course, there's so much else to see. There's giant anteaters, tapirs, abundant bird life. So that definitely ticked the box for me. And that's where it started.
Simon?
It was through him.
So sorry to interrupt, but can you tell me and some of the listeners what type of environment is the Pantanal? Is what it's obviously not the like the Amazon. What sort of is it shrub or grasslands or forest or mixture? Or
Well, the Amazon, I mean, not the Amazon, the Pantanal is very much like an environment we have here in southern Africa called the Okavango Delta. They call it a swamp, but whenever people think of swamp, they have sometimes quite negative connotations. It's big, big pools of water. Sometimes the pools will actually go into the forest and inundate the forest. You've got Atlantic forests, and then you've got open stretches of grassland. In Brazil, the savanna equivalent is called Cerrado. So they've got all three of those environments: forest, water, and the savanna. That's the Pantanal.
wow, so you can have a really rich biodiversity in that in those kind of environments.
Super rich biodiversity, and a beautiful environment too. Um, and it was a challenging environment at the time when before I left the bush, I was working extensively habituating leopard at Ngala in South Africa with a famous tracker called Richard Koza. Obviously, they were always doing habituation of leopard at Londolozi. It basically got its name through the habituation of leopard. And
So what does that entail? The habituation. What do you mean by that?
that's an interesting one, and I like this definition most. It's establishing a mutual respect between animal and man. Um, Habituation is not taming. Tame animals are sometimes pretty badly affected by the process of taming. It's not a tame animal. It behaves completely naturally as a wild animal would do, but you're able to go in this magical bubble and observe this behavior that's taking place around you without influencing it in any way. And the reason why you're able to do that is because the animal knows that you're not going to reward it, you're not going to feed it or do anything, but you're also not going to put
So
any
it
pressure on it.
doesn't feel threatened.
You're not going to threaten it. Exactly. Yeah. So that's the
So
habituation
you
process.
just become another animal that's not on the food chain, and 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 it can then go about its business, and then we
Exactly.
as humans can observe it in a very natural way.
Exactly. I mean, you are the proverbial fly on the wall or a bird in the tree. You are literally just able to observe the stuff, and and it was such an exciting opportunity because they had already got opportunities to do this with lion and leopard in Africa. They were making huge headway with snow leopard and tigers in India. And here was this animal that they referred to as the ghost of the forest that nobody was seeing except in the northern Pantanal where people would see them from boats. But from a game drive vehicle, as you do in Africa, it hadn't been done before. So the challenge was there. I'd done it with leopard, but I had never done it with a different species before. So it was challenging and actually very scary as well, because in the beginning, I had to go in on foot and find these tracks. And to be able to develop this trust, you need to have the animal with you every single day. You've got to go and find it so that it can get used to the fact that a vehicle comes, a vehicle goes, but nothing ever happens. But obviously, for the vehicle to get there, you need to get there. So I had to track these animals on foot, and I'd see these cowboys, the pantaneros, and they'd look at me and they'd have the sad look on their face, saying, "Shame, this poor gringo, he's going to die today." But
He's not coming back.
he's not coming back. I had many encounters. I mean, I'm walking in thick Atlantic forest, following tracks on my hands and knees. And I remember the first jaguar female that I encountered. I saw her. We were trying to make a little bit of a film of this work to raise funding for the project. And when I first saw her, she was there, and I realized how big they are. I mean, a jaguar female weighs up to 100 kilograms, which is as big as a lion, and well, as big as a lioness, and a lot bigger than a leopard. I'd spent lots of time tracking leopard, and all of a sudden, there's this massive leopard, and I'm 10 meters from her with nothing in between us. And it was that moment that I thought, okay, well, now you've got to test this theory that if you stand your ground and you don't run away, she will eventually back off. And I did. I didn't, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I stood my ground and slowly she moved back. She melted into the forest. And we named that female Esperanza, which in Portuguese means hope. And our initial habituation efforts were very much focused around getting Esperanza to be visible, to be viewable.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
And with all the challenges and the different environments, was that to try and keep track of her? Was that must have been a real challenge?
Oh yeah, no, that was a. I wasn't at that stage. I wasn't a bad tracker, but trying to find these animals every single day in forest, savanna, and swamp, it was too much of an undertaking. And at that stage, I had a young child with me, so to be able to do it and then train somebody else to do it became a bridge too far. So what I did is we decided the only way we were going to practically find them was actually to collar them, and we'd go out to these animals and in a very ethical way. And I can't overstress that the people that we brought in and the way we've spoken to them, we prioritized the fact that the animal was going to come out of it unscathed. So we collared animals with a collar that would have an automatic drop off system. So should the collar stop working or the battery reach the end of its date, then that collar would drop off so that animal doesn't have the hindrance of a collar on it. But the collar enabled us to habituate these animals. And actually, in retrospect, the collar was a way of protecting the animals too, because sometimes if an animal was to wander off a property and a neighboring rancher decided, oh, there's a jaguar on my property, this is a threat to my cattle, and wanted to shoot it, he'd think twice if he saw a collar. So we never had a collared animal that ever got shot by a rancher. And we learned vast amounts of information from these collared animals, and of course, in the process, started to habituate them.
Wow, wow. And then obviously the project got expanded, and then we chatted the other day about how you got gifted some cubs, and the story around that was what I found fascinating.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, the project that we started is an NGO called On Safari. Onça is a Portuguese word for a jaguar. Obviously, jaguars on safari, On Safari, and it's expanded now. They've got maned wolves being habituated in the Sahara right up near Brasilia. They've got property in the Amazon. They've got Atlantic forest. It's grown into a big organization, and And one of the things that accelerated our growth was actually exposure through BBC. So David Attenborough's team came out and they did some work on the jaguars that we were habituating, and most particularly those cubs. It was quite a sad, well, a very sad story. The mom lived in an area that got flooded by natural flooding, but she moved out of that flooded area into suburbia. And a woman came back home one day and found in her garden that there was a female jaguar. So she called the only thing that she knew to call, which was a fire department. I don't know where the fireman came in with a dart gun, but apparently a fireman pitched up with a dart gun and darted her too many times with a dart gun, and she actually she collapsed and drowned. And they were really sad when they went in there to they didn't know what had happened to bring her out. They found two cubs, two little girls, two females, and those two females became part of of a very very powerful project. It was a project where we were going to introduce these cubs back into the wild. So I didn't want to do it initially, but Mario, being a race car driver, was quite persistent. He was adamant that these animals had to get back into the wild, and so I started looking at different people.
The track record of doing that kind of thing isn't great for either the cats or the people around them.
Yeah, I mean they've ended up in some cases killing people, harming people, or being killed by indigenous wildlife because they didn't know the skills that were required to live in the wild. And I did lots of research on the Adamson's lions in Kenya. I spoke to Gareth Patterson that had worked with them after they came from Kenya back into South Africa. I spoke to John Varty, who was doing some work with tigers. And all these people, if I talk about things that didn't work, it sounds like I'm running them down, but actually you only learn through mistakes. So I've actually got a high regard for them. But the moment the penny dropped was actually watching Mowgli and the Jungle Book, because I'm watching Mowgli, and Mowgli, let's not forget, was raised by wolves. And in the end, Mowgli walks off into the sunset with this pretty little Indian girl that he saw across the river. And let's not forget that had Mowgli been raised by a wolf, firstly, he wouldn't be able to converse with her. He probably would have been howling mad. So there's no ways that would have happened. And I remember thinking, Simon, that's the reason why all these people and their cubs fail when they go back into the wild, is because they haven't been given any wild skills. Now, I didn't initially. I was thinking maybe we must have pulleys and drag the animals with pulleys, and I thought, you know what? The only way you can do it is to let that inherent behavior within their DNA get teased out, and the way in which we teased them was by we put them in an enclosure, a 1 hectare enclosure deep within in the Pantanal, with nobody was allowed near it. There were big signs saying if you come near this enclosure, it could threaten your employment. So all the people that worked on the ranch stayed well clear of that enclosure, and we kept them hungry. And initially, the only way we could feed them was by putting piglets in there. But because Mario knew people like Nelson Piquet and prominent people in motor racing, he was able to jump through some hurdles, and we could get wild prey into the enclosure. So they did get exposed to wild prey. And I don't feel bad for the fact that they were getting piglets either, because one of the problems with the Pantanal are feral pigs. And the feral pigs, they can cause quite a lot of destruction to the natural environment. So having jaguars that were targeting them was a nice way of cleaning up that problem in the most ethical manner. So that was what we did. We put the feral pigs in there. Let them get very hungry, and eventually they killed a piglet. Now you've got two jaguars that killed a piglet, and they made many attempts and failed, and finally they succeeded. And when they succeeded, we started to give them more food, introduce wild prey, and the key moment that we realized, hold on, these ladies actually could make it, was one day we went to the enclosure and there was a funny smell. And when we built the enclosure, there was a big pool of water in the enclosure with a caiman. Now, the Pantanal is famous for these crocodilians, the caimans. There's about 10 million caimans in the Pantanal. And this particular caiman was too big for anybody who built the enclosure to remove. So what happened was we left it. We thought these animals, they've got to survive in the wild. They've got to know what this is. And we hoped that it wouldn't result in one of the cubs dying. Well, it turned out to be the opposite way around. That funny smell that I spoke about, those two ladies jumped into the water and they killed that caiman and ate them on the banks.
Whoa.
Now, the Pantanal has got 10 million caimans. So we knew that once they'd done that, that they could find food.
Wow, must have been so rewarding to see them be able to operate that level, you know. And then I take it they were kind of released from their enclosure and did okay.
They were released from the enclosure. When they got out, we thought they might stick together. They lived in an enclosure for about 6 months. So we thought as a team they'd be stronger in the wild. But actually, they're solitary animals. And when they left that enclosure, it was like, bye, sister. It was nice knowing you, but I'm going on my own. And they went in different directions. And both of those two females have both had cubs. In fact, they're not even mothers anymore. They're grandmothers. So they've had cubs and their cubs have had cubs. And it was that project that David Attenborough did the documentary on. And it was a very big moment for me, a very proud moment, because I've been watching BBC Attenborough shows since I was a child. And he said in his documentary, if it wasn't for Mario Harberfeld and Simon Bellingham, these jaguars would never be in the condition that they're in today.
Wow.
So it was quite a big moment.
That's an accolade, you know. What to
big accolade, yeah.
I mean, and just such a great story, Simon. That you know, all these previous attempts hadn't worked, and you were able to learn from those. And with the help of Mowgli, you were able to try something different, you know. And yeah, fantastic. What a wonderful story, you know, and to just know that legacy lives on.
Yeah, and that's it. You know, the truth is that there are many truths. The one is that the people that have failed in the past helped to guide the way, because their failures made it clear to me that this touching and cuddling approach that people have for wildlife and what they display is that I love the wildlife. Well, if you love it, keep your hands off it, because you're not doing it any favors by imparting human characteristics to something that needs very different characteristics to survive in the wild. That's the one truth. And the other one is that it was definitely a moment where we're getting involved in doing this work. I realized that I was on the right track. I loved what I was doing as a chiropractor. I really did enjoy my work. I could feel that I was making a tremendous difference to people, but I wanted to stay working in wild. So those moments were rewarding for me, because I realized that I'd actually, by following my passion, I was definitely on the right direction.
That's brilliant. And so how did you end up from Brazil back in South Africa? Was that? Yeah, I don't know that story. I know that you ended up back there, but I don't know how that all came about.
No, well, I have a company, and it's because of work that I've done tracking animals and finding animals for people, that I use my own family name, Bellingham. And so Bellingham Safaris had existed, and I used to go into Brazil and do work with these jaguars and come back to South Africa. So I was always based in South Africa and still am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And your tracking and Bellingham safaris, would you say it's mostly in Africa now, or do you still go out to different places and take it?
It's most of it is in Africa. I actually leave in a few days' time for a trip through Botswana, but mostly in Africa, Madagascar, Africa, and then occasionally going into India and Brazil. Those are the predominant areas that I work. I mean, I've done some work in Australia and in Tasmania, but I feel that the place where I give any value to clientele is actually here in Africa, and then in India and South America.
And tell me, how would do people ask specifically for a kind of, we want to go to India? Can you sort us out an itinerary, or do you have sort of like, oh, I'm going off to India and look for clients, or how does that sort of work?
No, no, it's people get hold of us, and it's through word of mouth. People that have traveled from us before, they'll go onto something like TripAdvisor and they'll see what companies have got good reviews, and somehow they get hold of us, and they'll then come and they say, look, I want to go on a safari to this area with my family, or I'm on a honeymoon. They give us a bit of detail, and then we take it from there. But the ones that we love the most are those people that are passionate about the environment, and they come to us and they say, you know what, we'd love to come to Africa, but we really want to see a pangolin or a cheetah or something like that. Then we'll put together an itinerary that really focuses on giving the very best experiences that those animals can provide.
So I hadn't done a lot of kind of game viewing or big game viewing. Obviously love being out in nature and observing and seeing things. I went with my family, and my sister had a big birthday, and she invited all of her siblings along for this lovely tour in Namibia, and it was amazing. And we got to see elephant and loads of other big mammals. Was a wonderful trip. But the one thing that struck me was that I felt very separated from the nature. You're observing it and you're seeing it, but you're always in your car, and or you back at the resort, and that's fenced off, obviously, because of for obvious reasons, predators and things like that. But even, I remember just sort of walking around, and I always kind of felt like I'm not in it. I'm not like, I'm so used to walking and being in the nature and feeling the grass under my feet, and it just, to me, I felt like sort of a degree of separation. I took some lovely photographs, and it was brilliant. But um, do you encounter that, or are you able to allow people to uh, walk, have greater access, or horseback, or other ways of getting around?
No, there's absolutely no doubt. I totally identify with what you're saying. And it's a fine line between giving people exposure to wildlife and not harassing wildlife. And this is an area where you see it a lot now on social media, especially where people expose on their social media things that they've done with guides that actually they shouldn't have done, because they actually compromise either their own safety or that of the wildlife around them. But there are many ways in which you can actually break down those barriers. All the game drive vehicles that most of the game drive vehicles that I speak of are open vehicles, so you still feel the wind in the wind blowing through the vehicle. You can see the animals; they'll come as close as they wish to, so you get that experience. One of my favorite ways of experiencing wildlife is on foot. When you're on foot, especially in big five areas, then you need to pay attention, because you've got things moving around you that potentially could hurt you, but you also don't want to put yourself into a situation where you compromise their safety. So walking is a fantastic way. But I mean, there's canoeing, walking, boating, and some animals are literally just not threatening. That's one of my favorite places to take people is into Madagascar, because there's just a bounty of lemurs and chameleons and birds. In the right environments, Madagascar can really be quite outstanding. And of course, in Madagascar, even the snakes, there's not a single poisonous snake in Madagascar. So there you can really
What?
get a lot of exposure. So I think that's it. Just trying to find ways in which you can do it that doesn't compromise the safety of the guest, but also gives the animal a lot of protection too. So when there's chances to get off a vehicle, even if you're in the Pantanal where you've got jaguars, I won't take people walking with a jaguar, but certainly I'll get off and I'll let them walk and see a giant anteater digging into a termite mound and getting termites. Um, yeah, I think it's important. It's a very important thing that you pointed out there, Tim. Just that, to allow people to feel this connection, and it's a beautiful point in time where we are with regards to that. In South Africa, there are properties now where you can safely walk with cheetah. Cheetah have never historically attacked people, so you can actually walk now and you can watch cheetah hunt. And obviously, you've got to walk in a way in which you don't compromise their hunt. But most importantly, if you're walking in a big five area, you also don't want to walk into something else that you didn't know was there. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's an
exactly. And
important.
you mentioned things like you mentioned snakes, right? It's like that was the one thing when I was walking, even with the kind of within the gated area of the reserve, that was the one thing I was like, I walked along and it was this little grass track. I was like, that doesn't feel right. Like that is snake central.
Yeah.
It was just I just knew I was like that's, and I just wondered like I was like no, my spidey senses went crazy, my
No,
snaky senses.
I totally get it. And you know what? That is the truth. Is that I think walking with a qualified guide that knows the area, and the guys, when you work in these areas, you start to get to know what moves through and how to approach the things that are there.
Well, that's where I was getting at. It was like it's having someone who actually knows the terrain, understands the animal, understands the behavior, understands that smell that indicates something that they don't even know, but they know it.
Yeah.
It's not even like a conscious level. They've smelt it. They've felt that sense has stimulated this hair and this nostril, and that means don't go any further. And they don't know why. They're just like, we ain't going, everyone back. And so having someone who has that experience like yourself must be just invaluable in terms of the overall experience for the client.
Tim, I definitely have spent a lot of time in the environment, but I don't want to blow my trumpet too much. There are other guys out there that do exceptional jobs, and when we put itineraries together, they don't always need to have me come along with them. I mean, I'm always happy to go on these trips, but you've got to pay for flights and for accommodation for a guide. People can go on a safari to different lodges, and if you get hold of, and I'm not pushing my own company, but if you get hold of a reputable company and you say, I want to see this animal, this animal, this animal, and I want to be with good guides, not in all cases, but in some cases, you can definitely do that. You can definitely do that.
Well, that's good to know. And while we're on that, I'll just let everyone know that I'm going to put Simon's details in the show notes. And if you want him to point you in the right direction, or even put together a tour, you know you're in good hands, because even if he can't do it himself, he'll definitely be able to point you in the right direction. Yeah, it's just fascinating to hear how that interaction of man and animal, and we need to find that balance, because people are so disconnected from nature, and they want to go and see these things, but we want to respect the animals, and we want to respect our livelihoods too, and respect the people that live there. And I know that tourism brings huge amounts of income into places like Africa, and I'm sure every other country. And those natural resources are to be respected and looked after. And it sounds like you guys do it in a very respectful way.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Tim, and yeah, I appreciate the referral to us. That's wonderful of you. As I say, there are other reputable companies that do incredible work too. But one of the signs of a good company is that they're not chasing after the money. They are genuinely chasing after the experience that you want in an environment that gives back. If you look at the amount of revenue that ecotourism brings in around the world, but certainly in Africa, I can sadly say that without ecotourism in Africa, the wildlife would be in the most appalling state because it's not coming from third world governments, it's coming from ecotourism. And so, good companies, you go on holiday, it's a lovely feel good factor. You go on holiday, you have the most amazing time, and you walk out of it and you think, you know what, I had a great time, but my money made a difference. It's great.
Yeah, and I think that's a lovely thing too, is to know that there's people you're meeting and that are guiding you or serving you in the restaurant are all benefiting from that, and it's just a wonderful holiday. Look, I like a beach holiday as much as the next guy, and it's good to have that downtime, but and it's obviously contributed to those economies. But I think in these rural areas they're often quite impoverished. So actually bringing in your American dollars, your British pounds, or whatever it is, it's making a massive difference to these communities, in terms of education and uplifting those communities. Do you guys have any specific projects you work with in that regard?
Well, look, I still continue to support um, Mario Haberfeld in Brazil with On Safari. As I said, it's growing into a big organization now, and they've got properties in the Atlantic Forest, in the Amazon, in the Pantanal. And Mario will often talk to me about different things that they're having a challenge with, and if I can advise because of something I've seen elsewhere project wise, then I'll bring it to his attention and bring it to Brazil. And then we're also part of an organization called the Long Run, which basically is conservation that's in it for the long run. And this is their head offices are actually in the UK, and they do wonderful work on properties all around the world, supporting the properties. Obviously, I prioritize trying to get people into long run properties, but there's a new component being developed within the long run, which is the travel component, and those two working together so that the travel component can bring people to these long run properties, but also let long run properties know what they can change to make themselves more appealing. So those are the two areas that I spend most of my time conservation wise, sending people to lodges through the long run and then advising with On Safari. And then I've got a 16-year-old son, which is a project in its own too. So that's
Which
where
is a
my
different
time,
type of animal.
totally different type of animal. Yeah.
Um, Look, we're running towards the end, Simon. You told us about exotic animals, panda and jaguar, and obviously the big five, and all these African mammals, and the lemurs and Madagascar. Is there any one of those or another animal that we perhaps wouldn't encounter, or was not, a big name animal, that you could tell us about, or an interesting story, or a funny anecdote, or I'm sure you got lots, and I'm putting you on the spot now to pull out one of many. But
You're putting me on the spot now. You definitely are. There are many, but there's two things that have intrigued me in recent time. Firstly, I think that there's a lot of wildlife around the world that definitely needs help. It needs people to go out there and to support them, and if that's just by going and having a holiday with them, it's still a wonderful part of support. Um, but what's also really interesting is that there's an opportunity in this time to go and travel all over the world, and you can get on a vehicle in India and you can see tigers. You can be on a boat watching whales. So it's a magical time from a travel point of view and a history point of view that we can do these things. But I'm very intrigued by a new development in technology at the moment, which is using artificial intelligence to start to monitor what these animals are actually saying to each other. And there was an article recently published from artificial intelligence work done on elephant language and finding out that actually elephants call each other by name. I mean, that for me was unbelievable. If we can reach this point where we can start to connect with wildlife and start to mine the wealth of knowledge that's inside the life around us, it's a very exciting time for humanity. I think going into space and looking for whatever they're looking for in space, a new planet, whatever might be out there. Yeah, it's got its rewards, but I think the most reward is just investing in life that surrounds us, getting more involved, and if we can start to speak to them and they can come back to us with knowledge, I mean that's vast amounts of knowledge there.
yeah, I just saw something today. They're doing something similar with sperm whales,
Yeah.
who it's similar, like decoding the language using AI, and the messages they send. I didn't have a chance to read anything about it. I just saw the headline, so I'm going to go and, as you say, I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I think it adds this. Certainly, as man has kind of put ourselves at the top of the sort of pyramid, in terms of being the uber animal that kind of should be lording of everything. And when we start to get some of the information back that we can understand, in terms, the artificial intelligence is helping us understand. They already understand, right? They know how an ecosystem works and their part in it.
Yeah, yeah.
And we need to, I don't know why we have to kind of understand, like, oh, maybe we could work together. But this, I think, will add to that. It's like when we get the depth of knowledge and start understanding more about that and how they interrelate, and gives them a more, even if it's like that kind of intelligence, right?
Definitely,
And
definitely.
consciousness. And as we delve into that, and if they're calling each other by name, then that's a pretty big deal. I mean, I know bees, a much smaller little insect, they recognize individuals. So I don't know if they call them by name, but it's massive. And when we
But they play.
yeah, sorry. So it's a very interesting side, and something that I think I'm interested in terms of AI. The rest of it, I'm not too fast, but this sounds amazing.
No, I get it. I mean, technology has got its pros and cons, and it's always been that. There's going to be aspects of technology that terrify us, but the reason why we go down that journey is because of potential rewards that might come out of it. And I think I mean, everybody that has their favorite pet in the home knows that there's a lot more going on in an animal than we give them credit for. I've got a little Staffordshire Terrier, and I take her for a walk, and she like pull on the lead. It's like, dude, can't you smell that just 5 minutes ago a porcupine walked past here? Why don't you want to come? She looks at me with this quizzical look and says, can't you smell that? Jeepers, these humans are not that clever. That's the kind of sense that I get coming out of a dog. And I believe that life around us is infinitely more intelligent than we give it credit for. We credit everything around us with the measuring stick that we use to measure intelligence in humans. And we can't use that same measuring stick for a bird, for a bee, for a dog, for anything around us. But when we can start to use artificial intelligence to get some of the knowledge that comes out, the benefits are profound. And in particular, Tim, I believe even from a health point of view, if you can start to understand how these animals keep themselves together from a social point of view, so all the psychology and all that aspect, but also from what they eat. If you could speak to an elephant and say, no, dude, if you got arthritis, eat that bush there. It works for me like a charm. There could be aspects that come out of that we never saw coming.
Yeah, it was fascinating. It ties on. We just had Craig Wright, one of our contemporaries from Durban, on. He's a herbalist, and he was saying that you need the whole plant. You don't just need that one thing. You need the whole plant. Um,
Yeah.
so it's fascinating. I think I'm glad we closed on this point, because it just leaves us kind of wanting more, right? It's like, wow, there's this depth of knowledge that we're going to access now. It's going to be super exciting to start to be able to understand and communicate a bit better, and start bringing in what probably indigenous cultures have done for years, just in terms of that general understanding, is that we can kind of learn that at a more kind of intellectual level for those of us who haven't had the privilege of having that experience. So I love that, measuring intelligence in a different non-human way, and hopefully artificial intelligence does that for us. So I think that's a brilliant way to end off, and a very hopeful way to end off. Often we end off talks about ecosystems and wildlife in a bit of a sad state, but this leaves us on a high, I think.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, no, look, there's definitely things to be very sad about, but ultimately you can't dwell on that. You've got to look at where we can possibly benefit and do more. When people can start to value the environment, and hopefully artificial intelligence could give us that, then all of a sudden, instead of losing this valuable resource, we'll cling on to it for all the benefits that we get from the environment from a human perspective, but also just from a functioning earth.
Fantastic, so well said, and Simon, I just want to say thank you again for joining us today, and for just sharing your wonderful journey and your great story. So I really appreciate your time, and keep living your passion.
Thank you very much, Tim, and what a privilege to be on your show. Really, so nice to have people like yourself getting out there and getting excited about the environment and exposing it to other people. So kudos to you. Thank you very much.
Awesome, dude.
Thank you.
Oh, I loved catching up with Simon and especially hearing about the jaguar conservation project in Brazil, in which he was so intimately involved. Simon and Jen run Bellingham safaris, which are world wildlife experiences. They'll take you to the world's finest safaris and connect you to our wildest places, all at the same time supporting conservation and restoration. So if you're wanting to have that bucket list safari, you'll be well on track with Simon and Bellingham Safaris. The link to their website is in the show notes. I think this review sums it all up for me. Meeting Simon, it is immediately clear why he has had such a remarkable career as a safari guide. He sees the big picture of nature, and it inspires him in a sense of reverence and amazement. Those who travel with him will not fail to sense his respect and delight in mammals, his profound understanding of their behavior and its importance to the rich web of life of which we're all part. Until next time, follow the signs and let nature be your guide.